faster, young bad girls do it well. Live faster, young bad girls do it well. Live faster, young bad girls do it well.
Hello and welcome to the Dollhouse. My name is Kit Kowalski. I'm an Australian feminist researcher and blogger. I'm joined by my co-host Edie Wyatt, who writes for The Spectator and whom you can find on Substack. We're here to talk about sex, gender, and all the nonsense in the Antipodes. How's it going this week, Edie?
I'm going well. Yeah, I conquered my migraine last week, so that's a good thing. Women of the world who are suffering the effects of menopause, you got to get through it. The only way through is through. Hey, how about you?
That's right. It's well, I am tired as usual, but last week I was really sick, and I'm feeling actually quite happy and bouncy this week. And I'm buoyed up by a couple of little wins that we've had. So our friend Julia Gillard was in the news earlier this week.
Making an ass of
well, we say beclowning. I think that's my new favorite word, beclowning herself. So some Adelaide women went to see her live, giving a talk with the ex-governor of South Australia about the advancement of women. And there was audience participation and some questions were asked. All sorts of things like, what is it like to be from South Australia? Asked by a woman from South Australia.
She wouldn't be a Labor Party plant or anything like that, I'm sure.
The tough questions. It was hard hitting. But some brave gender critical women from the Women's Rights Network Australia planted themselves in strategic places in the audience, and they managed to ask 2 of their 5 pre-prepared questions. One of them, what is a woman, caused Julia Gillard to go on a 4-minute waffling journey through Be Kind, Gendered Souls, all sorts of stuff. And she said, I'm very happy to answer your question, and then proceeded to not.
But she's a politician, I mean,
Hello, my name is Biddy O'Loughlin. Thank you for holding this event. What is a woman? And do you agree with Queensland's Attorney General Minister for Women, Sharon Fentiman, that trans women are women, and with the UK's leader of the Labor Party, Sir Keir Starmer, that some women have a penis?
Look, I'm very happy to answer your question, but I do worry that, and I should just say, I spend around half of each year in the UK. And in the UK, this has turned into a kind of got you parlour game. So if you're listening to the radio, you literally, there'll be some person on there from London City Council who's trying to tell you why the traffic's not going to flow well that day, and the journo will be saying, and can you tell me what a woman is, to try and create these gotcha moments. And I think we've just got to move away from all of that and just come at this once again from first principles and say to ourselves, we as a community are full of people with diverse stories and diverse life experiences. Amongst that rich diversity, which as Frances says is powerful, there are a number of people who genuinely believe that they are trapped in the wrong body.
They are trapped in the wrong body.
And they want to be recognised as the gender that their mind and soul have for always told them that they are. And it doesn't go one way, it goes both ways. People who have transitioned from being men to being women, and women who have transitioned to being men. And I think we've just got to say, like we want to show everybody else in the community, love, inclusion and respect, we should do that for each of those individuals. And then there are a set of issues that need to be thought through about prison arrangements, about fairness in elite sport, those sorts of things that we're up to thinking about and working through if we try and do it inclusively. Most people in their lives won't end up playing elite sport. Most people in their lives won't end up in prison. Most people in their lives will encounter at some point someone who is a transsexual person, and I think what really counts is the openness and the spirit of inclusion about the way that you encounter them. And I, having certainly met and known and appeared on stage with transsexual women, believe that part of that inclusion is referring to them the way they want to be referred to, using the pronouns that they want to be used, want to have used about them. I would seek to do that in that circumstance. I would seek to do it when I was meeting someone from an ethnically diverse background. If there was a particular way that they wanted to be referred to, have their ethnicity referred to, then I would adopt that way, and so the list goes on. And I think we can do all of that. We can kind of take the temperature out of this. And I think the temperature has been created for political reasons often, not because it's inherent in the discussion.
But so handled that a lot better, and maybe had been even Albo's adult female, which I wasn't happy with because he had put human in there. Even that would have been fine. A way to get away from the question, and then later to clarify to her, transgender mates that she meant legal female or something. I don't know what her advisors are doing, but I'm happy she
Well,
did. I'm happy that she made an ass of herself.
Well, she did say, I'm happy to answer the question, and then she didn't. And she said, oh, I live in the UK half of the year and I know about this question.
And the gender criticals are making way there as well. And then another woman, Elizabeth, specifically asking her about the girls who are becoming vulnerable in women's spaces. And then she said then her little sidekick said we'd already answered that question. So she said she was going to answer the question. She didn't. And then when she was asked essentially again, she said she'd already answered it, but she hadn't. So, good on you, Julia.
But we're, I think, it was great. It was on Rita Panahi gave her a great serve on Sky News, which is not something I watch all the time, but I like Rita. I think she's got a good sense of humour.
Yeah. There was a part of Outsiders which was really good. And not only that, but also she highlighted the little game that Stacia had decided to play, because Stacia decided to go over to her profile on Twitter and make suggestions of things that we would like to see in her podcast, in Julia Gillard's podcast, which she has. And I think they were very reasonable suggestions. And of course, it became a little turfy game where we all went over and asked, maybe she'd like to cover some of the issues that we were facing. So Rita covered those as well. And some of our little favourite people got up on the screen, Sky News, including Kit Kowalski.
That's right.
So that's the name of the game, isn't it? Getting the points out there.
So there you have it, around 4 minutes of idiotic waffle that shows where Australia's first female Prime Minister stands on this most crucial issue. She does not stand with J.K. Rowling, Germaine Greer, Riley Gaines. She stands firmly with the trans activists that have hijacked the left and modern feminism. Now, many of the women who had praised Gillard's famous misogyny speech turned on the former PM, and some made helpful suggestions on what she can discuss in her next podcast. I would love to see an episode on the Atheist Guide to Gendered Soul. Is one suggestion. I would like to see an episode on whether lesbian women are allowed to hold public events just for lesbian women. Well, not in Victoria, they're not. I like to see an episode on the use of propaganda in Australian media. Do you have an opinion on the implications for our society when leaders lie about whether their political opponents support Nazis or not? And a good morning to Victorian Liberal leader John Pesutto there and Dan Andrews. I would like to see an episode on self-ID laws that allow men like this to use women's toilets and change rooms. Now, these are women who backed Gillard, many of them who backed her famous misogyny speech. Now they want her to do better. I'll leave the final word to Angie Jones, who was defamed by the media and certain politicians for standing up for women. She wrote, I would like to see an episode on a female former Prime Minister who had the courage to admit she made a grave mistake, who reassures women and girls that she would do her best to rectify it. I wouldn't hold my breath, ladies. I wouldn't hold my breath.
And look, it was in the Daily Mail UK online. I think it was at the SMH as well. It got quite a bit of media coverage actually at the end of the day. And it just really highlights the issue and it raises it up. Now, if I think back to when I first became aware of this issue, it was something like this. It was something that was just a little bit odd that caught my ear in the media. And it was literally J.K. Rowling. And I thought, why? Why is she getting involved in this? That's a bit odd. And that's really what we're hoping for, is just something that's going to catch the ear of those women out there who haven't heard about it yet. And they're going to say, gee, why is the Prime Minister being asked this ridiculous question about what is a woman? Surely she knows. She was our first front hole having Prime Minister.
She was.
She's going to go down in history.
As far as we know.
As far as we know.
You
That's
can't
right. There
always
could have been
tell.
other transgender women prime
Yeah.
ministers
Robert
before her.
Menzies
We don't
could have
know.
been secretly.
Harold Holt, I think. I think he's most likely.
Maybe he didn't go missing. Maybe he
Yeah.
went out male and transitioned and came back as a woman and no one recognised him.
Maybe he's a mermaid.
That's right.
Maybe he became a mermaid, his true mermaid self. Okay. All right, let's
Yeah,
move
yeah.
on now.
So the news, there was two good pieces of news. One was Julia Gillard. What was the other one this week?
Well, Channel 7 are running a spotlight on detransitioners. That's going to hit the news on Sunday night. And it's looking to actually be real coverage of the real issues around transition, consent, regret, and what it does to children's bodies. So it's a tragic tale, but we're looking forward to having that out there in the public arena.
Yes. Yeah, it's a good thing. Hopefully they don't back down on it. I think they would know by now, media would know that they're going to get backlash. The Australian did that not so long ago. They came out and decided they were sort of scarping a bit, and then they came out and started reporting on the issue properly. And they got a bit of backlash, but they're a conservative paper. So I've already seen comments to Channel 7 that they're killing trans people and all the nonsense that we go with. But the women who are in our movement and the men, I think they're fairly well equipped with all the counterpoints there as well, hopefully. So as the debate goes into back in the social media, we know it'll get shut down, but hopefully we'll get our points out there.
Yeah, and there's going to be that certain amount of backlash, but what we're really just hoping for is to reach ordinary people who aren't obsessively Googling and this topic and aren't glued to their Twitters.
Yeah. The main thing and we'll talk about this tonight with our topic tonight, but the main thing is they're trying to bypass the democratic process. So what we need to do is try and mobilize the democratic population to say, hey, you're supposed to be making laws for us, and you're making them for a select group of people, and those people are pretty much politicians and made up identities. So that's the goal, I think, is to mobilize resistance, and that's only going to happen if we can get the word out there through mainstream media as well as alternative media.
Yeah. So a couple of really good pieces of news there this week, and however, it did come hot on the heels of another I don't know how to frame it exactly. I don't want to say a devastating blow because I'm not that devastated, but we did have a pretty serious development in New South Wales last week. On the 24th of August, independent MP Alex Greenwich tabled his equality bill and his conversion practices prohibition bill. So these are two bills that two of three that he's going to use to absolutely decimate women's rights, parents' rights, and the rights of children to grow up and to experience puberty in New South Wales, frankly.
He's got his little tentacles in all sorts of shit. Some of the stuff I thought, where did that come from? Why is he, he's into private schools, he's talking about prostitution, he's talking about surrogacy. He's wanting to go right through the whole legislation. He's got activists actively auditing legislation in order to bring it in line with the erasure of sex-based rights. That's the only consistent thing that goes right through.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about the equality bill, and I'll just read out the actual name of the bill in front of us.
I've been reading the wrong one, so.
All right. It's the Equality Legislation Amendment (LGBTIQA+ close brackets Bill 2023. Now, I had a really quick read through this because this is the bill that's basically going to deliver sex self-ID to New South Wales, and that's what's really got a lot of women quite upset. Now, I had a quick read through this when it was tabled, and self-ID was really the last thing that I was worried about after reading through it. The bill, it amends 20 acts, right? So for the, it's unprecedented, right? So he's wants to amend 20 other acts. So just the depth of legal knowledge that you have to have to really understand the impact that this is going to have on the law. You would need a team of lawyers to combat this.
And basically, what the team of lawyers would be combating a couple of people from equity organisations that are basically drawing on the law with crayons. This is what I'm seeing them. I'm seeing them with the big Crayola, and they're getting through all the bills, and they're just adjusting them. It's crazy. The amendments that they're suggesting are not, from panels of expert lawyers. They're activists.
No, these are activists, yeah. And they he's actually kept the text of the bills secret up until the moment that it was tabled in Parliament. So it has been very difficult for anyone to get a preview of the bill, to see what's coming. We've had women contacting his office every week for several months now, and asking, when will it be tabled? Can we get an advance copy? Can we consult? He did have a consultation last year, but consultation was basically, there were some broad questions and you were able to make a submission, but there was no consultation about the actual text of the bill. That has been incredibly limited. During the beat where he tables the bill, he thanks several organisations and individuals, including Equality Australia, who is the lobby group who were the ones who are going through the law to see which laws needed to be amended. Teddy Cook from ACON, Eloise Brooke from the Gender Centre.
We need to remind you that Teddy Cook is a person who had a website where she encouraged trans-identified females to just crash gay male spaces without any notification or asking for any permission, that they had no ability to not consent to have females in their exclusively gay male spaces. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, and I was going to also call out Morgan Carpenter, who is the photographer for that particular website that you've just mentioned, grunt.org.au.
We did a bit of an expose on that. It's not very nice to visit, but we have to look at these things to see what.
I actually did one of my first videos that I did for YouTube was about grunt.org.au, and I uploaded the video. And straight away, YouTube said no.
Oh, really?
I think because it processes it as it's actually uploading, and so it can actually interpret. And there was things in there that really just shouldn't be seen or heard. So I was discouraged for a while. Yeah,
minus 18 would be promoting this stuff.
They would be, yeah. And he also thanks the Greens and the Attorney General and the Minister for Health. So, there's a lot of activists in there. There's a lot of regular suspects. Yeah. And as I said, self-ID is very much, it's the least of what this bill seeks to change. Yeah. It does seek to allow anyone who's over 16 to simply make a declaration and change their legal sex to anything.
Yeah, right, it's far more radical than that, though, too, isn't it? It's like you think that's the worst of it. and we
Yeah.
go through all the implications. It has clear signs of coercion. Even some of it, I was reading through the conversion practices part of it, and it talks about which conversations are okay and which conversations are not okay.
Mm.
This is legislation, legislating conversations that people might have, not only just religious conversations, because it does specifically outline, religious communities, but also just regular conversations that you have in your house.
Yeah.
They are covered under this legislation. It's crazy.
Yeah. There's well, let's just go through some of the provisions
All right,
in
well,
the
let's start.
equality. Yeah. Have you got a present?
Sorry?
You've got your presentation?
Yeah, I've just randomly picked some, and we've just gone through some loosely, so it's
Yeah.
not terribly extensive. But the first one I've got is the bill would replace homosexuality protected attribute with sexuality to include
That doesn't sound too bad, does it?
to include homosexuality, bisexuality, and asexuality.
Okay.
I think
So
this
that's how many? That's everyone, isn't it?
that's anyone, including people who literally don't give a fuck. We're not supposed to swear, but that.
And so okay, homosexual, bisexual, and asexual.
That's right.
Are there any other sexualities that you can think of?
Well, the thing is, it would
pansexuals out.
This essentially, which is my argument in a lot of things, is it takes away the definition based in biology to base in whatever the government says. Because once you take it away from homosexuality, the definition of a homosexual would be an exclusively same-sex attracted person. So a homosexual male is a male who is exclusively attracted to other males, and a lesbian is someone who is exclusively attracted to other females. That's the real definition. So it takes it from that and it calls it sexuality. And here it says bisexuality and asexuality as well, but they can change that anytime they want. They can say agrosexuality, they can make up anything they want. But essentially what they've done is they've removed the rights from the body. And that's the most offensive thing for me, is because when you've known someone, as I have, as most of us would have, a little kid who's very gender non-conforming and grows up to be a gay man, and they get the shit bullied out of them for years, and then they go into the workplace, they should be protected based on that, not other stupid idiot things, that they are a homosexual person. That's what the legislation is intended for. It has a history of the oppression of homosexual people. They fought for those rights and they bloody well won them. And it's offensive that he just comes in here and says, oh no, let's redefine it, because we know that they're going to redefine it based on gender. We know that they're going to redefine it based on whatever they say. So it's dangerous.
Well, so for me, the shift really is that it was protecting homosexuals, right? Because of the vulnerability of homosexuals.
Yeah.
And now instead it redefines sexuality as a whole, and it omits heterosexuality.
Yeah. Anything but straight.
So
although it can include heterosexuality if you've got a different gender identity.
But if they're so I wouldn't, I think in Australian law we do tend to protect the dimension, as in we say you can't discriminate on sex, right? And by that you mean you can't discriminate against men or against women. And that has pros and cons, right? Because it might be more favorable to us if we said, look, you just can't discriminate against women.
I think it should. I think if we change the law, that's the way it should be.
But this changes it so that it's protecting the dimension, i.e. sexuality, but it's redefining sexuality to omit the vast majority of the population who are heterosexual.
Yeah, I had a look through the exemptions this week. I had a cause to look at the they publish all the applications that people write to gain an exemption, because there's lesbians, the Lesbian Action Group in Melbourne are applying for an exemption to the sexual discrimination law, so they can hold single-sex events. Now, and so I went to the website and had a look at all the applications. Almost all of them are girls' schools, are women, female people applying for an exemption to the Act so they can hold female-only things. Almost all of them. I don't think women should have to apply. I think that if a woman wants to hold any meeting, there should be no question, and that she should be able to exclude males from that, and she should be protected in the law to do that. It's just going the wrong way. So it's going the way that we get less protections, not more.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And, you know, when we look at discrimination, you know, I think we do tend to think of discrimination as bad, because discrimination comes to the law when you're being disadvantaged because of difference, right? Whereas there is also that positive discrimination, and by which I mean having single-sex only events or having same-sex attracted only events, you know, where it's actually for the promotion of a community. And there's even discrimination in the trans community. They're constantly having, you know, like trans only swim days at the pool, and they don't need an exemption because they're not discriminating against sex. They're allowing both males and females in. So I do wonder, would they need to get exemptions now if
based on gender identity?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's like that Simpsons, it's not Simpsons, probably Family Guy, that cartoon where the guy goes into a bar and he says, you know, do whatever you like. He says, I'm transgender, and he says, do whatever you like. I think it's a bit like that. I think it's a bit like they can pretty much do whatever they like in the intersectional framework, because they're the most oppressed of all people.
Some of the other definitions that they've brought in, which is a little bit strange, is they've created a category in law called the private upper body area. So this is a really strange way to put provisions in against police conducting a body search of a transgender individual. So if a police searches a trans man, i.e. a woman, then that woman might have breasts, but we don't want to legally say breasts or breast area, so we're going to say the private upper body area. Well, that's so it's a way of saying, because I think that it used to be that you could just say in policy, look, if you're going to search a woman's breast, try to get a female officer to do it. But now they can't say woman or man or associate, you know, woman with breasts, because that's transphobic. So we've created a legal area of the body called the private upper body area, and you're not allowed to touch it.
It interferes essentially in what we have gained as rights as women, in terms of our right to dignity and an absolute right to single-sex dignity, and to protection from males in public spaces, in spaces where government officers are interacting with us for security purposes. We not only had the social contract there, we had legal protections where we could reasonably ask for these things. Now we have to use this ridiculous language. And part of that is also the next quote I've got, because we saw this in Queensland as well, where Fentiman introduced this idea of sex characteristics, variations of sex characteristics. So the quote I've got here is, the bill introduces two new grounds for discrimination: variations of sex characteristics and sex workers, two groups especially vulnerable to discrimination. Having variations in sex characteristics or being intersex refers to people who, with innate variations of primary or secondary sex characteristics that differ from expectations. Now, they're saying this is intersex, but also in the bill in Queensland, it covers men who have grown breasts through titty skittles, basically, through hormone replacement. It's not replacement, it's, chemical hormones. So a man who's got boobies, so his boobies are actually got higher protection in Queensland once this legislation is enacted than a woman with a female body. Because a lot of women might have mastectomies, through breast cancer, but she should still be protected under her sex. But that sex is taken out and sex characteristics are put in. So Mr. grows his tits with titty skittles, has more protections than a woman who has undergone a double mastectomy through breast cancer.
Well, this is something.
It's like a Lego world.
This is the dimension that Roxanne Tickle added to his lawsuit against Sal Grover and Giggle. So he wasn't just claiming discrimination on the basis of his gender identity, but his lawyers took a little look at the legislation and said, oh, well, you've got breasts, you've got a hole, you've got female hormonal levels, you have characteristics of both a male and a female. So you can now claim intersex discrimination as well. So it's this really just goes back to John Money. And this is the
queer theory, yeah.
This is the analytical technology that was created by John Money in 1960, because obviously, you can't change your sex, right?
Yeah.
But if we can break up sex into all these little tiny components, like legal sex, chromosomal sex, body sex, psychological sex, hormonal sex, then each of those is a little lever, and we can push on that a little bit, and then we can start to make the argument, well, if you've got 3 out of 6, maybe you're a woman. If you've got 4 out of 6, definitely.
Now, a female male is now being redefined by the state. That's the dangerous thing. As soon as you say yes to this, as soon as you take the definition of homosexuality out of the body, as soon as you take the definition of woman out of the body, you then have to use other criteria. And that criteria is imminently less satisfactory on every level. And they say, what about those people who are a small amount of people who have both different intersex? And they use those people to justify what is essentially a queer theory argument, which has got nothing to do with intersex, with people with variations in sex characteristics.
No.
And that's what I was going to say before, and I completely forgot what I was talking about. The documents he cites, what we'll look later, one of them, or both of them actually, are just steeped in queer theory. This Monash University that's providing some of the ideological, theoretical foundation for this stuff, it's just riddled. They are bathed in queer theory. They were talking about it years ago when they started to integrate this stuff into the school system, which was roundly rejected by the people of Australia, let me say. That was all Monash University stuff, and they keep pushing it. They don't say, oh, people don't want it, we'll defund the department. They keep funding it, and they keep coming at us from a different angle with the same thing. And ultimately, the government are using it to undermine our rights. Basically, I think it's a technology of government, which they love because it just means they don't have to cater for our bodily needs anymore. That will be the end. That's the end point of this, that they can't, and we'll see that as we go on, they won't be able to protect us because they won't be able to define us.
No. And so there is an argument that is decomposition of sex, and this decomposition of what it means to be a woman is really targeted at removing our rights as embodied humans. So if you think about, say, where we actually define humans in law, it tends to be with reference to the special protections of women because of our bodies. So men's bodies don't get a lot of mention because they don't have these special protections. They don't have the special functions. They don't give birth. They don't lactate. And so to break the link between what it means to be human and what it means to have a body, you have to break that legal link between those functions and being a woman. Right. So if we can decompose what it means to be a woman, then we can dissolve and obliterate the rights of humans over their own bodies. Now, that might sound incredibly far-fetched, or it might not.
If it wasn't happening, it would be far-fetched. If it wasn't being recommended by the highest, I mean, the UN, all those organizations, they're American-based organizations.
And, if you think about like the rights to trade in genes, the rights to sequence your genome, the rights to patent, the genes that you have, that's all. The fact that you have those is related to you being a person who has a body.
Yeah. And parental rights. Parental rights are mostly based in biology. They've created legal fictions for adoption, and they've adjusted them for special family arrangements. And I don't know anyone who's against that. Lots of people end up in different families. There's tragedies and all sorts of things that happen. But what they do is they use those minority cases to redefine the whole thing, to redefine the whole basis of parental rights and what families generally are, which almost always is a man and woman having sex and producing children. And the law has been sort of over many years catered towards anchoring, not only giving those people rights, but mostly giving the children the best opportunity to grow up under the protection of those people and to anchor those people and say, you've got a responsibility for these kids. Because we know as soon as a child leaves that bond, its life chances reduce. Almost always. Very rarely, a child gets born and is adopted. It's not in the case of adoption, but usually an abandonment, those kids really suffer. So all that legislation that slowly changes over the years to try and it's not perfect, to get better, this stuff just cuts it at the root. By pretending that we don't know the realities of sex, of life, of homosexuality. It's deeply sinister. Even if you don't think that there's a conspiracy to undermine human rights, my God, you'd have to come up for another explanation about why they're actually undermining everyone's human rights.
Now, speaking of parental rights, one of the interesting things about this bill is that in his speech presenting the bill, Alex Greenwich talked about how commercial surrogacy is illegal in New South Wales, and he doesn't seek to challenge that. But he says what often happens is LGBTIAQ plus adults will go to another jurisdiction and engage in purchasing a baby, and the state of New South Wales is powerless to recognise their parental authority over that baby, even though the baby's parents have relinquished authority by selling the child to that LGBTIQA plus adult. So they're going to make it legal to travel outside of New South Wales to another jurisdiction to engage in commercial surrogacy. So you can literally go across the border, buy a child, and then have your parentage of that child naturalized in New South Wales. Now, I ask you, if you are at all concerned about the rights of children and the rights of children, to to have a stable and, you know, and happy upbringing. If you agree with the ban on commercial surrogacy, so if you agree that we shouldn't be buying and selling human beings, then why would you undermine provisions that are there to discourage the trade in human beings?
Yeah. When people act illegally, like it says, my bill would not lift a ban on commercial surrogacy in the state, but it would remove a ban on commercial surrogacy arrangements outside New South Wales and empower the courts to issue parental orders to intending parents of children born from these arrangements, if it is in the child's best interest to do so. So what he's trying to do, again, is he's finding very small and rare examples of where people have done something illegal, or they've entered into a commercial surrogacy arrangement for whatever reason, and the child's suffering for it because it can't get certain legal status in Australia. Now, that's unfortunate, but it's a result of a legal action. The way to fix that is not to make the action legal, is not to put a loophole in the law so that essentially child trafficking can become a reality in our country. That it's like they try and ignore all the realities of the worst part of human nature.
Because we can be coerced to have babies, we can be coerced to give up our babies, and women can just simply be trafficked as breeders.
And it's a class issue, of course. You know, it's not Kim Kardashian who's being a surrogate for the poor lady down the street. We know that's the reality. We know it's poor women who are pulled into surrogacy because of financial incentives, and it shouldn't be a job. Having a baby shouldn't be a job. It's not right. It's an exploitative industry, and we've decided on that as a society a long time ago. But Alex bloody Greenwich has decided to undermine all these things.
And this is such as like the rights of men to procure children. Really?
Yes, it's related to and during the gay marriage push, it was normal, and then all of a sudden they started to come up with this demand that that they should have access to female bodies. That the fact that they are two men and can't produce children should be considered infertile.
A disadvantage. Yeah,
that's right. Infertility the same way that it's infertility that if you or I didn't have ovaries or something, which is ridiculous. This is the reinvention of equity in ways that are no good for women. Now, are we going to go on to sex work now? Is that?
I think sex trafficking is a natural progression from here, because for like Alex Greenwich, he is a gay man. And this bill is going to deliver unprecedented access to women's bodies.
Yeah, he's really committed to looking after his bros, isn't he? In terms of giving men access, sexual access, and access to women, and access to the reproductive labour. So another little, this bill, it's just full of them. It's not like one thing. It's worse than the Queensland one. Exerting coercive conduct or undue influence to cause or induce someone to commit an act of prostitution or surrender any proceeds from it is an offence. The offence creates complications and risks for sex workers' businesses in recruitment, sex workers talking about their work with friends, and support services helping a person starting in sex work. The offence does not address sexual servitude, which is addressed in the Crimes Act. So what, you correct me if I'm wrong, what I think he's saying is that he wants to remove the crime of coercing someone into sex work.
That's what it appears to be.
You and I would think should be a crime. If someone ends up in sex work, they don't always do so willingly. I mean, I grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. Let me just say that straight out. And I knew girls that went into sex work. I was very much at risk. I would have starved to death. I would have eaten my own feet. There's no way I would have gone into sex work. But, and I remember now, I look back, there was one girl at my school who became a prostitute, and I saw her at some place. I kept bumping into her, and she would always approach me because we weren't that friendly at school, and I didn't know why. Then I look back and I thought she knew I was vulnerable. At that time I was homeless, I was looking for a place, and she kept trying to bring me into these conversations, and I thought, what are you, I was busy or I was doing something. And I remember thinking later, oh, you know, when you have a conversation and you don't pick it up, I'm a bit dingy anyways. So sometimes people tell me stuff and I've got no clue what they're talking about. So I remember now that she could see I was vulnerable. These people have an instinct for girls who are vulnerable. And I remember many of them, you know, getting caught into it. Now, that's one thing. The other thing is that when there is coercion, you know, in families, parents sometimes coerce girls into, they should be friggin' arrested, you know, because even if the girl's of age, even if she's consenting because she's got no other option, that should be a bloody crime. The fact that Alex Greenwich, in all his equity, is coming into the parliament saying that that shouldn't be a crime, and he's speaking on behalf of sex workers, he's speaking on behalf of pimps, is what he's speaking on behalf of.
He's 100% speaking on behalf of pimps here. So the example that he gives is sex workers talking about their work, right? And in my mind, what we've got here is just, you know, an ordinary middle-class prostitute, someone who's quote unquote chosen to do it. They're happy in their job. They've gone to a barbecue. What do you do, Shona? Oh, I'm a sex worker. I love it. Right? That's the image that's kind of conjuring up in my mind, right? But the reality is that women are coerced.
Yeah.
The
The
fact
reality
is
is that girl who was trying to keep having conversations with me about what she did, and I thought, what the fuck's she talking about?
yeah.
And what it was is this: she was trying to coerce me into something I was vulnerable to.
And you know, women, we've just had these exposés about Andrew Tate, who has said that he does recruit women online. He uses the boyfriend model, you know, where he'll strike up an online relationship with someone, bring them over to his country, and then say, okay, now you need to pay me back, right? Oh, you know, you do it once, you do it twice, and then he moves on to the next one, you know.
Yeah.
So we know that women are coerced into sex work. We know that women are coerced into doing OnlyFans.
Or as Alex calls it, helping a person starting in sex work.
Yeah,
I'm just
that's
helping
right.
them start in sex work. I'm like the, you know, recruitment officer.
And he has, you know, he's really trying to kind of promote this idea of the happy hooker, you know, there's a girl and she's at high school and she grows, you know, the girl at high school who always knows she wants to be a prostitute when she grows up, right? Like, as though there's always a girl who wants to be prime minister. There's always a girl who wants to be a doctor. There's always a girl who wants to be a cleaner. There's always a girl who wants to be a mum. And there's always a girl that wants to be a prostitute.
Your daughter came home one day and said, Mum,
no,
all I've ever wanted to do is to be a prostitute.
No. Vulnerable women are coerced into this. They're recruited under false pretenses. They're coerced. And women who are who have addictions are brought into prostitution to pay for their addictions.
Yeah.
We know this stuff. We know this. Why are we still falling for these narratives?
And it's the language is so clinical. You know, this is not sweeping the floors. I've done some shitty jobs in my life. I've cleaned toilets. I've, you know, done revolting job. But this is not that. This is not that. It's
Well,
work?
So, one of the interesting arguments is one of those reflected back sort of arguments. Well, if sex work is work, then, or if sex is a service, if sex really is a service, then it shouldn't matter who provides the service to you, right?
Yeah, discrimination.
So it absolutely, you shouldn't be able to discriminate based on age, on looks, on
On sex.
on sex particularly, right?
Yeah.
You know, you should be able, you know, an 80-year-old man should be just as capable of providing sexual services
That's right.
as an 18-year-old female.
Yep.
Right. And then we know that that's not correct. We know that that's a lie.
We know that they prefer young women. Why would that be? You know,
And
like,
so,
how do they even know? How can they even tell?
So,
when
yeah,
when a
this-
man wants to exploit a woman or a girl, he can bloody well tell.
he knows.
He knows. He knows what a woman is then. There's no question in the sex industry about what a woman is.
There's none of this transgender women, you know, oh, don't out me in the workplace. It's
And they do, and they say all transgender women end up in, you know, disproportionately in sex work. Maybe they do. I don't know, but they're certainly not coerced in the volume that young girls and the trafficking of girls in Asia. I mean, I've been to these countries. It's these girls have got no choice. They're not being helped. They're not being helped to start in sex work. It's the reality, the disconnection from reality in this bill is so extreme. Everything about it is extreme and distressing.
And why on earth are we going to solve the unemployment crisis by getting women into sex work? How on earth is that helping women? You know, so we're just creating a market of where men can sexually access women.
And you know what
And
the ultimate end is? We've seen it in Germany. I saw a hint of it in Germany. I don't know whether it was concluded, but if sex work is work, and this is just a regular job, and people take unemployment, and women end up on unemployment benefits, you know, you have to. I'm in favour actually. If you're on unemployment benefits and you're able-bodied, and you get offered a job, and it's like a job at a supermarket or something, you should really be pressured to take it if you're able to do it. But if sex work is work, what if you're offered a sex work job as part of your unemployment? I mean, who's to say that the legal framework is they're already providing that legal framework. If you have a system, which many countries do, where you only get unemployment benefits for a certain period of time, and if you're able-bodied, you have to, and there's jobs available, if you're offered a job, you really have to take it.
And what does it mean to be able-bodied as a sex worker, really? Now I've done quite a lot of like reading and research into prostitution in Australia. This is, you know, some time ago now, but one of the key themes that emerged from my readings was that a large proportion of women who are prostitutes are women who are sort of have those invisible disabilities, right? So they have mental health issues, or they have depression, or they have like MS or something like that, where it's like, you know, they can fake it for a certain number of hours per week. They can engage in these personal services and they can get their hours to suit. So, you know, they're their own boss. They can negotiate their hours, and they can have a bit of downtime, so they can get like a meager income, essentially doing a minimum number of hours. So we've already got women who have disabilities who are unable to actually access services in a dignified way to help keep them going, right? So they have the kind of disabilities where they might be able-bodied sort of most of the time, but say if you have like depression or something like that, you know, it's really hard to actually hold down a job. So they're engaging in sex work as a way to negotiate that space.
Yeah.
So we're already exploiting these women,
Yeah.
and they're just going to extend that exploitation out to more and more and more women.
If it's not illegal to help, what's the wording again? Help a person starting in sex work, what's going to happen to those women who've got intellectual disabilities, who
That's
try
right.
to drop out of school, who end up in low paid jobs, who struggle to find accommodation? You know, I know my sister was all very capable of that until her cognitive ability started to decline and she became homeless. She couldn't quite figure out how to pay the bills. Even she got off the public housing list because she didn't have an address. All this stuff, it snowballs.
And it's very
And
easy for someone to help her make $100, isn't it?
Or we'll
You know?
provide you with an accommodation. We'll pay your bills. We'll
Yeah.
look after all that for you, because women who, you know, have intellectual disabilities frequently really struggle with that. And if they've got no family, so there's the person who's always been vulnerable to prostitution, again, is vulnerable to prostitution. And then all of a sudden their whole life, their accommodation, everything is dependent on this source of income until they age out. I mean, you're going to age out of prostitution. What's going to happen to them, you know?
And of course, you know, there's addiction and substance abuse. So not only actually being exposed to prostitution, but we know that there is a high coincidence of substance abuse amongst sex workers, right?
Yeah.
And
injuries,
you know,
body, it's very bad on
injuries.
the body.
I mean, look, I said this to my husband one day. I was, you know, arguing with him about prostitution, and I just said, look, if you had to go to a job where your coworker could, or, you know, a stranger, your client could come in off the street and squirt their bodily fluids into your face, you'd walk off that job, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, well, you know, that's the point. Like the unions, could you imagine it if the metal workers, right, the metalworking union, we actually said, okay, right now, lads, from today on, strange men are going to be able to squirt semen in your faces, and you can't go on strike.
No,
we wouldn't have it.
No, or push their cock into you so hard that it'll cause a tear, and that happens regularly. Like, you know, in the old days when you had the proper, you know, the pimps, if you roughed up a prostitute, you know, that was their property, wasn't it? So they'd beat you up. You know, you'd get the consequences for that. So now the state has taken over that, or workplace health and safety has taken over what used to be the pimp's role. So what's going to be the consequence, you know, and how are they going to prove it? And, you know, it's how are we going to log? Are we going to log these workplace injuries? Are we then going to have a proper inquiry about the effect of prostitution on female bodies and the effects of prostitution on women's lives? So we're either going to be honest about it or we're not. You're going to put it out in the open? Sure, let's talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, could you imagine the hazmat recommendations, like the personal protective equipment recommendations for engaging in prostitution? You know, you would have a face shield, you would have a full body latex, you would have... It wouldn't be very sexy. It would undermine the entire purpose. And so the solution is just don't bother about it. You know, check that there's condoms available. That's it. And we know that that's not enough.
And we know that a lot of men who access prostitutes are like rough or violent as well. We saw from Caitlin Roper's book, they thought that those sex dolls were going to be a replacement for prostitutes. But the problem was they become so badly damaged. The prostitution dolls, that they used to hire them out, but it became unfinancially viable because the damages that the men were enacting on these dolls, which are the exact replica of, physically look like women. So they're not just screwing them, they're beating the shit out of them constantly.
Yeah, that's right. That was was it Sex Dolls, Robots and Woman Hating, The Case for
That's right.
Resistance by Caitlin Roper.
Right, but we got to get her
And-
on as well. Yeah.
And they were actually businesses that tried hiring out sex dolls as though they were prostitutes, and they came back so damaged.
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
And they're reasonably robust. One would think they're pretty much almost as robust as a human body. But we don't even need to go there, because we know that people who study prostitution know that the damages that women have from prostitution are extensive.
Yeah.
It's not just like a normal sex life. It's not like having sex 3 times a week with your partner. It's it's the kind of
having sex 10 times a day, 20 times a day
with someone who
with strangers.
who has got no care or concern for the welfare of your body. So yeah.
So
That's what we think about prostitution.
That's what Alex Greenwich
Yeah.
wants to bring to the women of New South Wales.
Yes.
Right? He wants to make prostitution and there's a lot of other provisions in there, like basically taking away any summary offences to do with prostitution that we won't sort of get into. But really, he wants to take away the restrictions on women's bodies.
Yeah, it's all creepy. The whole thing, it doesn't say it out loud. And one of the things that it talks about, we'll talk about that later, is how it wants all the language restructured, because the language they use hides the reality of sex and sexuality.
Yeah. So, look, speaking of industrial relations nightmares.
Yes, segue. He does seem to be very concerned about intimate contact. So the quote I've got here is, trans and intersex people may be more comfortable with persons of different sexes conducting searches on different parts of their bodies, and they be more comfortable with a person of any sex who appears more sensitive and less intimidating. So we're all talking, this whole thing is the focus of trans people and people of trans experience. I had a quote that I passed over before where it talks about people, diversity should include people of trans experience.
Yes.
So we're watering everything down into the queer ideology, into what's your experience, how are you comfortable. The rule was always you go to an airport. We always think of airports. I mean, that's the only place I've ever been searched. And if someone's going to touch your body, that they're a female officer. That's what most people would prefer. I've also I remember leaving Lebanon and being taken aside. My daughter was taken aside by security, and they said that I could come with them. And so we were put in a separate private room, and a female officer was assigned to us so they could search her. Why they wanted to search a 16-year-old girl, I've got no idea, but it was all done properly. It was all very, proper. But had that been a man, I don't care how many, machine guns they've got over their thing, I would have been screaming my head off. It matters. It really matters who touches your body, but not to Alex.
Well, I mean, it does quite a bit actually, because he's putting a provision in there that a transgender person can choose the sex of the person who searches them. And there's a bit of if that person's reasonably available and that sort of thing. But no, so a transgender person, someone male who claims a woman gender identity, can say, I want to be searched by a female officer. So a man can try to compel a woman to intimately search him.
Yeah.
Now, let's please remember that a trans woman is anyone who says they're a woman.
Yeah.
Regardless
and he's trying
of
to extend that to people of trans experience as well. So
a non-binary.
Can, high heels, some guy who's got a little kink that he likes women clothing, he can choose a female customs officer or whatever they are, or security officer, to touch if he has to have his little, if something's gone off, the alarm's gone off, and you have to check under his little nutsack. He can choose for a woman to do that. Now, what's the workplace health and safety for her? What's her rights?
That's her right.
in that equation, because she would sign up for the job and she would know that she have to touch people intimately, but she would be told that it would only be women, and that would be okay. I mean, I would think that in that circumstance, it's never very comfortable. I mean, we go to the doctor as well. I've got a female doctor, and there's a lot of intimate sort of things happen there, but we know it's, we put ourselves in that mind space. This is a space, we're all safe. There's a female doctor. This has to be done, and we get on with it. But this is not that. This is not, a woman who goes to work and all of a sudden she has to have and he's going to get an erection. Can you imagine it? It's sexual abuse. It's rape culture is what it is.
It's rape culture, yeah. And look, there are provisions around if the person of the sex chosen is reasonably available, but then that puts an administrative burden onto whomever is conducting the search to explain why they're not available. So, maybe you've got a police station with a male officer and a female officer, and, they agree that the female officer is not available to search men.
Yeah, because she doesn't want to
maybe they agree.
And we can't say to him that.
But maybe there's 10 officers. Maybe there's 5 males and 5 females. It becomes a little bit less reasonable to say, well, actually, sorry, the female was away or getting a tea or whatever.
And all of a sudden, all your drug smugglers are all going to be non-binary,
That's right. And it's that of trans experience, which is language direct from Teddy Cook at ACON, who says he's a man of trans experience, she's a man of trans experience. And
the bill would ensure that the definition of workforce diversity in the Act includes sexual orientation, being of trans experience, and having variations in sex characteristics. So all the bloody, whatnots, all the boundaries are gone. The boundaries that we set for sex, it's all gone. It's all gone in nonsense.
Well, I mean, just back to workplace diversity for a second. Look, workplace diversity is not just about, it used to be about sex balance. Basically, it used to be about having a few women in the boardroom. That's what workplace diversity used to be about. And
putting pressure on them to have women in there, which I think was good.
And, and people of color or people of different ethnicities, and not just recruiting from the same pool of old boys, right? It was really about shopping around and trying to get the best candidates, even if they weren't from the old boys network. And that's what diversity was supposed to be about. But now it's about this tokenistic, identitarian, but yes, we've got to collect one of every color, every shape, every size. And now it's not about getting women and the other thing is having a woman on your board, right? It's the reason to have a woman on your board is that you have someone that has a different perspective. Okay. Someone who can say, hang on a minute, this is what women think about this. This is going to affect women and girls. Let's not make those decisions because that's going to disadvantage 50% of the population.
That's
and
right.
It's actually getting that diversity of thought.
And sometimes it doesn't occur to men. I remember watching Seinfeld get interviewed, Jerry Seinfeld, and he talked about when he first had the idea for the show. And he said that him and Larry David went in, pitched it to the network, and they said, you're going to have a woman in this. And he said, because we're idiots, it had never occurred to us that they had to have a woman, that it was going to be just all the blokes. And the only reason it didn't occur to him is that he's a man. He'd been functioning in the comedy world and doing very well for a while. It never occurred to him. And he had to have someone say, look, you're really going to need a woman in the show. And then as soon as he heard it, he said, of course I do. and then he then the character of Elaine was born. So it's not all about people being assholes, people being sexist, people being, whatever. It's about people not understanding another perspective, and that's legitimate. But to then take it to, we have to have people of trans experience, and you think,
Well, what's going to happen is it's going to create a premium on these individuals. It's going to create a premium on being a person who is intersex, which is a vanishingly rare condition, or set of conditions. And it's going to create a premium on being a person of trans experience.
You may not want to disclose that as well. I mean, if the advantage is in the employment to people who have got intersex characteristics, you're not going to want to say to the guy, look, actually, I've got some gonads, as well. So I've got a bit of that going on in my reproductive system. It's none of their business. Why? Unless it's so obvious that, that there's which being of trans experience is. When these big hunking blokes put on high heels and they walk into the workplace, they do look ridiculous. And women do feel uncomfortable, especially when they go in their bathrooms. And that's not discrimination. That's just normal. That's just life.
Yeah.
And I've got and I don't mean that for feminine presenting man. I don't think they're creepy and weird. I think they're fine if they use the men's toilets. They're creepy and weird if they want to come in the women's toilets. I don't have any problems with men coming into work. And I know this is a bit of a different debate in the feminist perspective. Some of them don't like the men dressing up as women or in female clothes. If you want to have it in the public service where, the men can go in high heels, I don't care. The only thing I find creepy is when they then say that they're actually women and they want to go and invade our spaces. Before I get myself in any further trouble.
All right, what's next on our agenda?
I think this is the last quote before I've got the other.
This is about our language.
That's right. So we've been talking about the way that this is actually just hiding reality in language. So it's saying the bill would modernise the language for HIV and AIDS. Language in New South Wales law does not unambiguously apply to all genders. Descriptions of people, relationships, families, and bodily attributes and capabilities are gendered, making the way provisions deal with trans men, trans women, non-binary people, and those who do not fit gendered stereotypes unclear. The application of words like brother, sister, maternity, and breasts, when limited to women, is not clear in its application to some trans people. Gendered language should be replaced with inclusive language, but this requires extensive work across the entire legislative portfolio. My bill would include interim measures to expand interpretation principles for gendered language under the Interpretation Act 1987 to ensure references to relationships and bodily attributes or capacities through gendered terms are inclusive of all relevant relationships and people, regardless of gender. This will make our legislation clearer. It will make everything they say, it's the opposite.
It's the opposite.
You're not protecting women. You're exploiting women. You're not making language clearer. You're making it murky so that we don't understand and that women can't get protected. This guy is dangerous and out of control. This is terrifying. He wants to amend all the legislation in New South Wales. He's got a couple of bloody people in his bloody
lobby group,
activist organisations that are going through all the legislation and to try and change it to hide sex. And we can see that in some of the documents that are coming up that I'll show as well.
And this assumption that using a word like brother or sister is somehow unclear if you don't fit sexist stereotypes is insane.
No, if my brother puts on high heels, he's still my brother.
He's still your brother.
It means male sibling. That's what it means. It's very clear. Sister is female sibling. Mother is female.
Breasts are breasts. Men
Everyone
can
knows what
have
breasts are.
breasts. Men can grow breasts.
If a man says
Right.
he's a tits and ass guy, we know what he's talking about.
But this is the thing, like it's very, very, very clear that,
Very clear.
you know, men can grow breast tissue. Like there's an actual condition, and it's very rare in men, but it does
Yeah.
happen.
Yes.
And, you know, men who get really fat and overweight can kind of get, we call them moobs, right? Don't we? But, you know, we know if you say breast, you're talking about the fatty, the fatty deposit on your chest and the mammary gland, and, you know, everything that's in that structure is the breast.
we shouldn't be compelled to hide their sex, is what they want us to do.
And we know that maternity, that's the condition of a woman being pregnant, giving birth, caring for a baby, lactation. It covers that whole period.
Even a trans-identified woman, she's still
Man, what? I don't know. Wait, what?
a trans-identified woman can still get pregnant,
Oh, yeah. Yes.
and it's still maternity, and she's still a mother.
Correct.
That's the reality. There's not.
And a woman who is a surrogate, a pregnancy surrogate for someone else, still goes through maternity.
Yeah.
She is still a mother.
Yeah. So he's making
He's making it very unclear.
Yeah, deliberately.
Yeah.
This needs to be resisted at every level and absolutely thrown out without any further consideration. They cannot justify this legislation. It's shocking.
Well, so however, if we do resist, this legislation will make it harder for us to speak up.
Yes.
So this legislation also includes provisions where it actually creates a new crime of outing someone. So that includes sort of disclosing somebody's gender history, which is what they which means disclosing their sex.
Their sex, yeah.
Disclosing their sexual orientation, their status as a current or former sex worker. So even though we are removing all the stigmas around sex work and it's no longer a crime to pressure someone into sex work, it's still a crime to call someone a sex worker.
Is it the same for a lawyer? Are you going to out someone even though there's a stigma about being a lawyer? Is there going to be a crime to say, you know, Jack's a lawyer? Like, if it's work, if it's just work.
If it's just work, then why is it a crime to say someone is a sex worker?
Yeah.
Now,
it's all there to disguise sex. This will remove our women's ability to identify a man on sight. If you say that's a man, all this layers and layers and layers, that's what they're trying to do. Men are trying to have the absolute right to be seen as women by women. And this is really important. They don't care as much about men. They care about women. They want access to our spaces. They want access to our cultural meanings. They want access to our bodies.
And they want us to like them. They want us to identify them as being women.
Yes.
It's not enough for a man to identify them as a woman. Women have to identify them as women.
That's right. And
we have to agree with them.
Yeah, and we don't. We don't see them as women.
No.
And we won't. We refuse. We dissent, which is the whole purpose of our.
So, yeah, unfortunately, it's really unclear whether or not outing someone, is still applicable if it's really obvious, as in they're a celebrity and they've gone through a very public transition, such as Danielle Laidley, aka Cinderfella, who was a player was an AFL player and coach, went through a very public transition. It's not clear whether or not you will still be allowed to say Danielle Laidley is a man. But they're making provisions so that outing someone will be able to be classed as domestic violence. You will be able to get a domestic violence order or an apprehended violence order against someone who outs you or threatens to out you. And so, I don't know what effect this is going to have on trans widows, for example.
Yeah.
So
Well, that case
that's
in
women.
Canberra where
Yeah.
the girls were raped by a family member,
Yeah.
and they have to now turn up to court and refer to him as a woman.
Yeah.
The indignity of that is
Yeah.
too much. And that will probably discourage them. I mean, you know, you can pull out of these trials right up to the end. You can just say you can't be a witness, and that's what they do when you're involved in a rape trial. The defense, not the defense, the defense will interview you, because I went to one of these interviews with them, and they say it's for various things, but really they're seeing if you're going to be a solid witness, and they want you to fall apart before the trial, because they want you to be, if you go before a jury, they want you to present badly, like you're a liar, so they'll undermine everything. So this will just be another thing, and for these girls who are have been subject to years of abuse. Now
to go and have to say she,
yeah, and that might be the last straw for them. They might just say, well, I'm not going, I withdraw my complaint, because these pricks, they will do anything. They say, all the trans people, no, these people will do anything. They'll identify as a cucumber if it means that they will have access to girls and they will get away with crime. These are criminals. And so what you're doing is you're creating massive safeguarding problems by taking away boundaries in the law that women can use to protect themselves. I mean, it's so fucking obvious.
Even taking away our ability to say what is happening. That's
right.
Now, not only that, but they're going to make it a hate crime. I want to get the actual wording here. To do public acts that I think it is promotes or expresses hatred towards, serious contempt for, or severe ridicule of. Now that's what really worries me, is ridicule of a person on the grounds that the person has been a sex worker, or their gender identity, or their intersex status, or their sexuality, etc. Now
you got to wonder how much of that happens as well. I mean, in the workplace, really, if you say to someone, oh, you look like a fucking idiot or something, it's already against the workplace policy, right? You're already going to get censored at work. You're already going to get socially ostracized, because it's not really nice to say that to people. But to say, look, I don't want him in the bathroom.
Well, that's adding his gender history.
That's right. And that's ridiculing him and suggesting he's not a real woman. So those kind of things, standing up for your rights, which we already know, standing up for our rights has already got us called Nazis. And, they say it all the time online. You're a hateful person. You write transphobics, one of the local guys, you write transphobic. Oh, you write transphobic things about trans people. Like, it's just made up shit.
They call the truth hateful. And this really worries me, that this distortion of reality, that I really, hate is such a strong thing, and I really don't hate anyone in my life.
No.
I just don't think men are women. But the other side call it hate.
Yeah.
Now, we've had an episode reported to the Safety Commissioner, right? We've had an episode taken down or restricted in Australia by YouTube because of the content.
Yeah.
Now, they would agree that that what we say is hateful. It's not hateful. So the other the things to note here as well is that it's not just speech or communication. So it's speaking, writing, printing, displaying notices, broadcasting, telecasting, screening, just gestures, wearing or displaying clothing, signs, flags, emblems, and insignia. So, for example, the suffragette flag could become criminalised.
Yeah.
Right.
Or the definition of woman, adult human
The
female.
definition of woman on
Yeah.
a T-shirt could become criminalised
Mm.
because they will say that it is promoting hate.
Mm.
Now, it is simply promoting the factual definition of woman.
Mm.
It is simply promoting that we are women, that we have rights, and that those rights do not extend to men.
Yeah. And we have
And
the right to protect
the-
ourselves and to declare truthful things about what they call sex work, you know,
And
to lobby for our rights.
exactly. I mean, is
Protection
it
of girls.
is it going to be, is this going to actually impact the right of researchers to write about the experiences of women in sex work?
Yeah.
Now, we often find this, women who are in prostitution,
Mm.
they're either unable to speak about it or unwilling, and some of them don't want to. Some of them, you know, don't wish to speak out about prostitution.
And they shouldn't have
But
to.
we find women who exit prostitution
Mm.
often do want to speak out. They do want to warn
Yeah.
others. They do want
Yeah.
to talk about the realities, because they wake up to themselves and they realize the situation that they had found themselves in.
Maybe they want to
Is this
say
gonna
negative
limit the
things about the people
ability-
who helped them get
Who
in.
helped them. Yeah.
Oh dear God.
And it will be also, there's actually provision as well for aggravated sentencing for any of these
yeah.
supposed hate crimes.
So
So
if you smack someone, they can add an aggravation on it, so you get a higher fine, or it can go from a fine to a prison sentence. It can leap it up to the next level.
yeah,
That's right.
yeah, it can, exactly. And so essentially they're going to, it really suggests to judges when they're sentencing
Mm.
that if a crime, e.g. outing someone, like
Mm.
saying Daniel Laidley is a man,
Mm.
right, was motivated by a hatred, we already know what they call hatred,
Mm.
or prejudice against a group of people, then you can get a tougher sentence.
Or it can, like, we found that with Miriam, I can't remember her name. Why can't Miriam Miller?
Yeah,
in
Marion Miller.
Scotland. Yeah. The crime that she allegedly committed, which was very dodgily withdrawn, was communication through a carriage device, or intimidation through a carriage device, which was Twitter, like saying to people on Twitter certain things with an aggravation on top of as a hate crime.
Yeah.
So it could just be me saying, you know, we don't like Alex Greenwich much, so we might say Alex Greenwich is a bit of a dickhead, which against any other politician. I mean, the things that have been said about politicians would be pretty normal. But then if you add an aggravator to say that he has a sexual protection of, you know, he's a homosexual.
Well, he's a homosexual, yeah.
Yeah, which he is. So then you would it would be a hate crime. So we think he's a dickhead because he's gay, but we don't. We just think he's a dickhead because he's putting legislation which is undermining the rights of everyone else.
I think that he doesn't care very much for the rights of women.
No, and we might say something ungracious, and I don't mean I haven't said that he's a dickhead, but it's just an example. We might say something ungracious about Alex because we oppose his policies, but then we could get technically the crime could then be construed that we intimidated him through a carriage service, and an aggravation of a hate crime could be on top of that because of his LGBTQ status. So another thing I wanted to raise before we don't want to go on too long is that the legislation, I always look at the justification for these kind of legislation because it's all illegitimate. The legislation in Queensland was the same. It was based on Yogyakarta principles, and a bunch of stuff that was illegitimate. It's not real. And these people have an obligation to make laws for the people of New South Wales. Under the Constitution of New South Wales, I assume it's very similar to the Constitution of Queensland, where the representatives who are elected to Parliament have an obligation to make laws for the people. So they have an accountability. And what they do with these LGBTQ organisations is that they bypass the accountability. We know these are not popular. We know if people were asked in the streets, we know what they would say. So one of the things that he bases it on is New South Wales LGBTIQ+ health strategy 2022 to 27 for people of diverse sexualities and genders and intersex people to achieve health outcomes that matter to them. Now, I always have a look at these because usually they're based on terrible data, terrible statistics, almost consistently. And you probably know a bit more about this one than I would, because I've only just had a look at it today because it was mentioned by your boyfriend, Alex. But it's very similar, you know. When you're thinking about the amount of women in New South Wales that'll be affected, right? There's millions, but they base it on 1,600 LGBTIQ people in New South Wales, including a community survey and roundtables, consultation with 750 New South Wales staff. Basically, there's no women consulted on this. There's no impact studies done of what this might mean to women.
This is the policy that brings intersectionality into New South Wales government. So there's a big section on intersectionality, and it fails to define intersectionality, which I find slightly hilarious, if not a little bit scary. And there is a huge section on how they're going to train the staff in New South Wales Health on intersectionality as well. And I'm just got it open here. I'm going to try to look up the definition because it's actually quite funny. So it says intersectionality recognises that an individual's health is shaped by multidimensional and overlapping factors. These include gender, sexuality, intersex variation, and other social determinants such as race, culture, language, religion, age, disability, education, income, geographic location, housing status, immigration status, and disease status. Now, sex isn't there.
No.
They don't actually say sexuality.
They
don't actually say sex. They just say
most important factor, really,
in
health outcomes. I mean, I've been talking about the pause affecting my health, and it really has. It really has impacted my life. And I have menopause because I'm a woman, pretty much.
And there's all of this language in here, like training staff to pay attention to the intersections, right? Recognizing the intersectionalities, and some of that is actually what pisses me off is it takes from what is real and makes it unreal. It skews the language to actually undermine those issues. Yeah. And, you know, it's very self-referential. So it talks about, you know, understanding the intersectionalities. Now, I'm not sure that a person's health is shaped by all of these factors, right? So if you have diabetes, you have diabetes. Perhaps the way that we treat you, the way we reach you, the way we educate you, the way that we,
there's socioeconomic factors there.
Yeah, absolutely. There are poor people in regional areas.
Yeah,
sure.
And McDonald's is cheap. Shitty food is cheap. Good food and access to good food, is more expensive. And there is a cultural thing as well. So there's an educational element to that. So yeah, it it does matter, but it shouldn't matter in the way that you get treated at the hospital.
Yeah.
My father had
I think that-
diabetes because he ate too much rubbish and he smoked and he drank.
I think sex and race are actually biological factors, and they do have an impact on disease.
They do. Yeah.
And they have impacts on disease risk as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, who is vulnerable to HIV/AIDS?
Yeah.
Who is vulnerable to monkeypox?
Yeah, we used to call them
Okay.
lifestyle factors, didn't we?
We used to call them lifestyle
I'm sure Alex wouldn't call them that now, but they are lifestyle factors. It's not that
But
homosexuality is a lifestyle. It's that it's a sexual orientation, and that leads to
behaviors, right?
behavior, which put people at
Now,
risk.
if you're a gay man and you marry your high school sweetheart and you only ever have sex with one man who doesn't have HIV, what's your HIV risk? It's like
Yeah.
0, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if you don't
It's
if you don't engage in those risky behaviors, then
Hmm.
your sexuality has almost 0 bearing on your
That's right.
HIV status. But
And we're
it's
not
the
aiming
lifestyle
to-
that's associated with the sexuality.
Yeah, yeah, and gay men do have a different culture around sex.
They do.
It's just the reality, especially since coming into this. I've been educated by people about things that I had no desire to know. I didn't know a whole range of things. I didn't know that some men were tops and some men were bottoms. I don't know why I didn't know that, but apparently that's a thing. I didn't know about twinks. I didn't know about a whole range of language that the gay men have very kindly educated me about since coming into this field. And lesbians also have educated me about things. There is a culture, and they have a bloody well right. They have fought for their rights to not
Have their
hide
culture.
and not be shamed about that and say, well, this is how we do. Lesbians don't have any bars anymore, but you hear them talk about, oh, when we had gay bars, weren't they fun? And this was the dynamic, and this, there's no reason that lesbians shouldn't have bars anymore, except that Alex has decided that trans women are women and that they should have no right to have a single sex space. Not just Alex, but people like Alex and the ideology that it's coming from, which is pretty much queer theory, really. And I don't know whether they think it's good, but you look at the statistics and it says mental and emotional distress, and it's always times likely. It's always based on, 57% of LGBTIQ plus people, and this forced teaming. So it's as if they're all the same. And, the section that before this, new trans rights push came, I was studying, like they were making claims about gay and lesbian people. And I remember studying something saying that actually the health of gay and lesbian people has improved. That's when they used to divide it between gay and lesbian and trans. They used to separate them. So the outcomes were improving, but now they lump them all together and use this times likely to make as if regular guys, a gay bloke living in Surrey Hills who's a frigging corporate banker, his health outcomes, if he's taking care of his health, it's a completely different story.
Well, that's where intersectionality is really important, because it enables you to lump everyone in together.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it lets the single 20-year-old gay banker who lives in Surrey Hills and earns $700,000 a year. It lets you lump his concerns in with like a poor underprivileged woman who lives out in the back of Burke, right? And, is sleeping on a mattress in somebody's front room.
Or some kids who's been
right?
on artificial hormones, puberty blockers and artificial hormones, and has osteoporosis at 25.
Yeah, it allows you to put them all in a big bucket together and to say, oh, isn't this awful? And it's great for funding. This is why government loves it, because you can, It's the essence of rubbery figures.
Mm.
And of course, we know that trans is a way for gaming intersectionality, right? To the, you know, there is an extent where intersectionality does make some sense. It's like, okay, well, if you're poor and you're a woman and you are
Indigenous.
if you're Indigenous, you know, and you're a lesbian, then you face multiple challenges.
That's right.
Right? We know that that makes sense. That makes
Yeah.
intuitive sense.
Yeah.
But the inference that they draw from that is that you're actually 4 times worse off. Whereas there's another way to think about it, which is that you can only get rejected from the job once,
Yeah.
right? You know, you come with 4 of these dimensions,
Yeah.
but the job can only say no to you once. It's
But
not
the
like there's
intention of
4
it-
jobs that are saying no to you.
No. But the
So
intention of it was for when Kimberly Crenshaw originally penned the idea. I mean, she's a lawyer, right? The
Yeah.
intention was when these people come before the law, when someone comes before your court and they're a lesbian, what do we say, Indigenous, what was the other one? Female.
woman, obviously, and poor.
Yeah, yeah, poor. The judge doesn't treat her exactly the same and she's stolen a piece of fruit. I mean, that's probably extreme that she'd go to court for that, but she's stolen, say, $300. And then you've got a corporate lawyer who's a white man, straight guy, who's pinched money from his company. They're not the same. So that was the intention. The intention was to say, if we put that woman in the criminal justice system, she's just going to get worse and worse. But really, he's got enough money we'll give him a massive fine and tell him never to do it again. So that was the intention, I think, was to cushion people who are already disadvantaged from prison or whatever harsh consequences might be.
I think the original case that she looked at was there was a company who refused to hire a black woman, and the company's argument was, oh, we've got black people working here and we've got women working here, so we didn't discriminate against you. And Crenshaw said, well, actually, if we look at it, you've got black men working in the factory part doing manual jobs, and so and then you've got white women in the office doing office jobs, and this woman is a black woman, and so she's you discriminated against her. You know, you didn't find her suitable for employment because she didn't fit into either camp. So it was kind of like to try to open up avenues for people who were disadvantaged, who were discriminated against, to be able to get some remedies.
And to say that's not okay. I think it's okay to say, you know, this is not okay. It was in Hollywood a few years ago, and I remember thinking, yeah, it's not okay. It's disproportionate, you know. But anyways, that was the intention. Yeah. This is what they've made out of it. They've made a Frankenstein's monster out of it. The other report that he bases it on is it's got La Trobe University's fingerprints all over it. And this Timothy Jones, I saw him a couple of years ago too. He was all in favour of the safe schools stuff. That was a massive failure, you know, with the people. The parents don't want that stuff. And so there was a massive fuss, and they managed to get some inroads, I think, with resistance. But they just keep going. So this report that he's saying is vital to his work is healing spiritual harms, supporting recovery from LGBTQA+ change and suppression practices. So it's got a bunch of the usual suspects, including it's all government money that's coming into this research. And it's problematic. They've got 3 tables that they use as the basis for their research. And you can tell by the tables, I haven't highlighted them, but I might cut in the ones that I've highlighted. So they had 3 sets of survivor interviews from people that have come through conversion practices, data from 15 in-depth history interviews. So they've got the 3 tables they've got is life history interviews, survivor characteristics, and that was 15 people. Table 2 was 7 people, and the other one was 15 people. So the statistics that they're trying to change, all the legislations that contain our protections in, are based on not
Like
that
30 people?
37 people.
37 people.
Yeah, and I've done a little chart because I just know you love a little chart.
I love a chart.
And I
Yeah,
might put it
thank
up
you.
there. It's pretty basic at the moment. But of the 15, the first study, 15, 9 were gay, 3 were lesbians, 2 were bisexual, and 1 is other. But when you add them up, when you look at the gender characteristics, because we know that if they say cisgender, they mean female. If they say transgender female, they mean male. So in my calculations, there were 4 female, 10 males, and 1 was uncertain because they say they're non-binary. So there's no way to determine what sex they are. In the study of 7, there was 2 gay, 2 lesbian, 2 bisexual, and 2 other. And in my estimation, there was 2 females in that lot and 5 males. And in the 15, there was 6 gay, 3 lesbians, 4 bisexual, and 4 other. So as the studies get more modern, you get less ability to determine what the sex of the people are. It's not tracked. I figured that there were 4 males there, 4 females, 9 males, and 2 uncertain. So in the total, in the study, there was 10 females, 24 males, and 3 people who there was no way to tell what sex they were. So
Oh my God.
the data is inherently corrupted. Once you take away definitions of male, female, and homosexual, which they have, they've changed all those definitions. There's no way to help these people. I'm from a Baptist church. I've never seen conversion therapy practices in the church. I've talked to gay men who said that they've gone through them. So I believe they happen mostly in America, I would think. And I'm against them. And I want to help people. I want to find a solution for some of these kids. I knew a kid, I'm close with his parents, very, very camp. We were in this very small Baptist church and he was always on the piano and he was very elaborate and he's become a musician. He said he really suffered, and I'm interested in finding a way that we can help. We can find a solution here. This is not that. Doctoring the statistics is not. There's no way. How can you tell? How can we trust this information?
Because how can you be converted away from being non-binary or pansexual? Or this is what I would like to know. I mean, imagine if you said, I'm pansexual.
And I said, that's all bullshit. Is that conversion therapy?
Is that conversion? Yeah.
Yeah, because it is bullshit. It's all bullshit. Non-binary nonsense. But I'm not going to say, oh, your identity is valid. That's another thing he pushes, is try and make, to extend all the protections, to remove the protections from homosexuals and from women and extend them to these elaborate definitions of people who nobody knows. It's not innate. It's just some sort of made up bullshit. So what would the motive be there? What would the motive be to take away the legal protections for real people and give it to bullshit identities?
It's still shocking, the fact that we are going to change the laws based on the wishes of such a small number of people. And by that, I'm really talking about people like Teddy Cook from ACON and Anna Brown from Equality Australia, Alex Greenwich, the independent MP. This is a very small number of people.
Yeah.
And and of course, Alex Greenwich's mum, who he does thank for giving him the idea to pursue legislation. Now, in his speech, he does thank his mother. He does thank his mum. Doesn't thank his birth giver. He doesn't thank his front hole having parent.
That's very unclear language.
He doesn't.
What do you mean? I'm so confused.
He doesn't thank his gestational carrier. He thanks his mother.
If only had been more specific. If he only had used clearer language.
That language is not clear because we don't know who he's talking about. Is he talking about a male or a female? What relationship is he talking about? Is he talking about someone who raised him or someone who birthed him? Are we talking about someone who has a frontal or not?
Cisgender person.
Right? Really? Are we talking about a cisgender person? Are we talking about a trans mother? Who knows, Alex? I think that it is peak hypocrisy for you to use that language and to invoke your mum when you are removing the rights of women, including the rights of mothers in New South Wales.
Yes, to protect themselves and protect their children. It's appalling.
Yeah,
we are disgusted. That would be our final word. I think that we find it.
I think so. Yeah.
Let me just have a look. I just want to. I hadn't checked the comments, but apparently we got some angry. We got some anger from last.
Are we going to recap Depp v. Heard now, are we?
I don't think we should recap, but I just want to say I don't repent and I'm not sorry.
So
it was just an idea. We thought we'd give it a go. We didn't watch. What I find funny too is that people call us, sort of suggest that we're losers for doing that. And they've watched the whole trial. They've watched all the commentary. They've followed it since the beginning. They've taken a side. They're invested. They know every detail. And they want to insist that maybe, we only just watched the Netflix thing. We thought it might be an interesting thing to talk about. But, I'm not sorry.
Oh, yeah, it was a little bit interesting, the Depp v. Heard. I was thinking a little bit more about it as the week went on, and really I think my last word on Depp v. Heard is that this is at the end of it, this is one woman, this is one relationship. This is one relationship in distress between two very rich, very powerful, very privileged people. And the fact that we are so caught up in it as a representative of and trying to make it into a representative of the status of women as a class, I think is a folly. At the end of it, I don't think that Amber Heard, one way or the other, or Johnny Depp, one way or the other, represents women and men respectively at large. I think they're exceptional individuals, and what they do should be done in private.
I found the dynamic around it interesting, given the dialogue that came into Twitter. I just watched it. I had my migraine, so I watched probably more documentaries than I should have, because I couldn't read or, I wasn't, working much. So, I thought it might be an interesting thing to do. Someone also said we've deleted comments. I haven't deleted any comments. Kit hasn't deleted any comments. If comments have gone,
we can't be bothered.
YouTube would have taken them away. We don't usually delete comment. I've never deleted a comment from the Dollhouse, I don't think. I don't even think I've deleted it. I have been accused of deleting it from my own YouTube as well. I haven't. So I'm not smart enough and technically savvy enough to know what's happened, but we haven't. If you want to tell us that you think we're idiots or whatever, we're not going to do it. We don't care. We encourage commenting and all the things. Another lady also said that we've got to put the subtitles up, so I'll have a look at that this week. Apparently it's a feature that I can just put on, so I'll check that out. I know I can do it on the software, but that would take a lot more work because you have to go through and edit the whole thing. But I'll promise I'll check that out. I'll do it tomorrow.
All right. Well, will we leave it there tonight?
I think so. We're a bit tired. I've got a neck problem. Just I've been doing this all night and moving, and I've got a back problem, so I need to go and get some heat on it, get myself out of misery.
Yeah. So, in conclusion, look, the equality amendment legislation, it's going to deliver self-ID to New South Wales. And that is the
Much
least
more.
of what we are worried about with
Yeah.
this bill. It is terrifying. If you're in New South Wales, even if you're not, contact your MP.
Yes, get in contact with them.
Contact your MP, contact the New South Wales Attorney General, contact anyone you can,
Yeah.
right? Talk to your hairdresser, talk to the teachers, talk
Mm.
to the mums at the pickup, let people know about this legislation because it is very concerning.
Yeah.
And, you know, we do have a chance of stopping it. 100% we have a chance of stopping it. If we don't stop it, we're going to keep fighting it.
Yeah.
But this is going to remove a lot of protections for women in New South Wales.
Yeah.
All right, we will leave it there.
Yeah, resist.
Resist. Thank you for joining us again on the Dollhouse this week. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. We are on YouTube and Spotify and Google Podcasts, and our show notes end up on Substack. I'm Kit Kowalski, and I'm here with Edie Wyatt. We will be back next week with all the news and views in the Aussie Genderverse.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Live faster, young bad girls, do it well. Live faster, young bad girls, do it well. Live faster, young bad girls, do it well.